is the best pitching development organization in Major League Baseball? It's a very good question, and to answer it, what we're going to do today is dig into some aggregated data in the minor leagues specifically. What I'm going to do is combine everything from A-ball through AAA, so those 4 levels, mush it all together and try to find some insights. It'll be screen share style, so I'll be bottom right on your screen. Let's get going. Four-seam fastball velocity and usage are a pretty great place to start here. The Mets are number 1 in the minors in terms of how hard they throw their four-seam fastballs. They currently have the crown from the Dodgers, who have had it for each of the last 3 seasons. The Mets making a pretty decent year-over-year jump on this metric, obviously valuing velocity alongside the Marlins, who have also made a pretty big jump. Astros, Mariners, Guardians. As I see the average down here, the margins are small. So I'm not entirely sure whether you could say the Astros, Mariners, and Guardians are not good at developing velocity. Those are all pretty reasonable organizations in terms of pitching development. Four-seam usage is maybe where you get into some more specific things that I find interesting. The Rockies above 50% usage is crazy to me, especially for what those pitchers in the minors will eventually do in the majors, which I imagine is not throw four-seam fastballs because it's Coors Field and you're going to get BABIP'd to death. The Nationals up there as well. But the Tigers is one that I do want to highlight because they do some things a little bit different than other orgs. And as I'll get to in a bit, they're one of the more successful organizations at actually getting pitchers to perform, which is relevant. But my favorite part of this is bottom right. Lowest four-seam fastball usage. You have the Marlins, who've made a massive cut, resembling what the Red Sox have done. And the Mariners, who, again, have always been on this angle of like, we want low slot sink, sweep, instead of the more high vert fastballs, etc. The averages there, I think, more significant relative to the averages, right? Rockies being almost 10 percentage points above the average. Marlins, Red Sox, Mariners all being 10 percentage points below. That, to me, regardless of whether teams say they want to individualize, is an overall org philosophy that they're pushing down through the minor leagues. Successfully, unsuccessfully, not entirely sure. But I get the theme here for these 3 teams going, we don't really want four-seam fastballs because they get barreled. So what I'm going to do is, I have the data here, and then I made some notes. So let's go through my notes quick. Again, one thing I want to point out on the velocity side, as I mentioned, minimal year-over-year change in velocity. So all of these organizations kind of have around like a 0.5 difference, which gets back to what I was just showing about the Mets. They made, I think, like a 0.6 difference. So year-over-year velocity improvements, now that this has taken over the league from a biomechanics standpoint, we don't see massive jumps anymore, I don't think. I think most teams have started to get to the point where this baseline at, what do we got? What did I say? Almost 93 miles per hour. Is that going to tick up in 4 years? It's going to be 94? I'm not entirely sure. I think we're maxing out on the velocity side a bit. I could be wrong there, but just the theory I've noticed over the last couple years where we're not seeing as big of velo jumps in organizations. 2 things. I trolled the Rockies a little for being up. They're up 7.5 percentage points in terms of four-seam fastball usage. That's why they sit atop there at 51% overall. The more interesting angle here is the Rockies going from average to well above average, number 1. But the Twins, who had the 3rd lowest four-seam fastball usage in the minors in 2024, have now shot up to be about more average, which I find interesting because I do think generally people think of the Twins as a good pitching development organization. They were one of the first teams on Kinetrax, they integrated biomechanics really well pretty early alongside like the Guardians and some other orgs. And now they're signifying some bit of a usage trend here. The fact that it's up that much, to me, makes me wonder whether something changed internally about them not liking results at the majors. Maybe it's just pure happenstance of the guys they have, but I think there's more signal there than just all of a sudden the Twins are throwing more fastballs and there's no reason behind it. That big of a jump to me signifies some change in thinking higher up. The Rockies, again, I'm not entirely sure what they're doing. Marlins cut 6 percentage points. This resembles Boston from 23 to 24, where they made about an 8 or it was between 6 and 8 percentage point cut. Very similar. We saw some change there in terms of a bunch of firing of coordinators. Bendix in there for his first full season. Variety of changes, not surprising for them to push in that direction. And then a small nugget, Rangers and Brewers, both flattest and vertical approach angle. That's capturing a lot, right? Location, actual movement of the ball, slots, etc. But seem to prize that flatter approach, which I think we have seen for both those teams in the major leagues as well. You might be saying, Lance, I don't really care about forcing fastballs. I care about results. And here's what I got for you. Here's some results. Left side here, FIP. I'm using this over ERA. I still don't love it as a barometer, but I'm putting it up there just for reference. Partially because of the park environments between a lot of organizations, AAA, AA, single A. Listen, I don't have anything that controls for all that. So what I'm going to defer you to is on the right side of your screen, strikeout to walk rate. Very simple, right? This is something that we keep trying to reinvent the wheel on the pitching side, which with pitching stats and projections, a lot of the time, strikeout minus walk will get you pretty close to all these other far more advanced metrics when you add a variety of things in layered. Is it perfect? No, but I think it does a good job of IDing some teams that are good. I'm not sure about IDing the teams that are bad, though, which you'll see on the bottom here. This is a good bet, I think. I think the thing I want to point out, Mets, again, throwing a reasonable amount of four-seam fastball, throwing them hard, having a lot of success doing so, great. Red Sox, not throwing a lot of four-seam fastballs, but in doing so are still in the zone enough from a walk standpoint and striking out enough guys that they're up there on strikeout minus walk rate, which I find encouraging because what we've seen from the Marlins and some other organizations is the fact that they have been walking a lot of guys, not getting a lot of chase. So the K minus walk's not high enough, I think, to justify how low the four-seam usage is. The Red Sox seem to have found like the Goldilocks zone of that, which is encouraging. And then the Rays, who again have been very good on the performance side in the minors for a while. Bottom three teams, interesting mix here. Dodgers, highest walk rate in the minors. I'm going to get to my notes on the results in a sec and show you that. Nationals, not entirely sure where they're at. I know they have some fun arms. Travis Sikora, Harleen Susana, really good pitchers in the minors, but philosophically, if you remember, they had that sign that was like, we don't care how hard you throw ball four. Well, they're throwing a lot of ball four, unfortunately, so sorry, Nationals. Mariners is probably the most interesting, though. So, let's see if this is in my notes. Did I have this in my notes? I didn't, so let me stick on here for a sec. So Mariners are interesting. I think philosophically we'll get to them in a bit in terms of slider usage. I'll just say, again, low slot, a lot of sweep, a lot of sink, don't throw four-seam. Historically, have had good results in this sense, but I wonder whether there's some change going on there in terms of how they're approaching development that is changing some of their usage patterns, which I'll show in the sliders that we'll get to. But the Mariners are just a team to put in the back of your mind. For my notes here, if you want some positivity around a team that maybe hasn't been great at developing pitching, the Athletics made a really encouraging jump. Third worst K minus walk to fifth best. This is a 6 percentage point change. It's pretty big overall if you consider everything in terms of how they're generating whiff. They're in zone a reasonable amount. They have, I think, a bottom 4 or 5 walk rate as well. So they're doing it more so through controlling the zone rather than just like massive stuff. But this is a good change. I know they have Mike McFerrin there from Wake Forest. They have some other sharp minds. Gage Jump, probably one of the more pop-up-y, not pop-up, but just guys who's risen in prospect circles. He's now considered, I think, probably a top 10 pitching prospect in baseball. Really fun. So uptrend, if you want like a rising team that's maybe a bit under the radar, I like where the Athletics are at. The Dodgers, oh baby. I feel like I could do a whole video on them because they're catching a lot of flack now for the injuries. They also have the highest walk rate in the minor leagues by almost 2 percentage points. So it's not like they're walking a lot of guys. They're walking a lot of guys overall. And I didn't split this by level. I did actually talk to someone in the Dodgers org about this, and they said that we just want you to hit it hard and then we'll get it on the runway is kind of the metaphor I was given. And listen, I think that's a reasonable approach. I think the context of the Dodgers is important. Are they bad at pitching development? Absolutely not. The context for them is that they could go out and spend for any free agent they want, such that I think they're taking a different approach on the development side towards higher impact, higher variability, which I imagine is pushing in this direction of big stuff, big velo. I don't really care about the walk rate. If 1 in 10 guys figure out the command, then we have a starter. But we don't really care about these guys that just randomly get to the majors on, a random work interval of success. Like the average pitchers, they don't really care about, I don't think, personally. That's maybe how you justify the Dodgers in the high walk rate. Other low walk rates, I mentioned the Athletics there, Rays, Tigers, Twins, all pretty good. So maybe I like seeing these subtle stats that maybe signify some of the better pitching development orgs in baseball. And I think those are 4 that are in that conversation. Maybe the Athletics, again, are a rising team. Sliders, yes, slider velocity is a good one. I'm not going to dig too much into other shapes. I think fastball slider gets you a lot of the way there. I'll hit on a couple in a bit, but let's start with slider. Velocity on this, Rays, Dodgers, Mets. Again, encouraging for me on the Mets that they have the ability to stay in zone, generate miss, throw sliders hard, and they're not walking the world like the Dodgers, along with the Rays, too. The Rays are very, very into zoning everything, not throwing a lot of secondaries, fastball slider for most of these guys, really using heavy, heavy central targets for their north-south types. And it works. Slider velocity on the other side, again, not bad per se. It's just philosophically probably a bit different here. Yankees at 83-ish, Giants, Mariners. I think this is more so signifying sweep. So I'm not using a stuff model here. I'm just looking at pure velocity. But you will see that some of these teams pop on the sweep side of things. Again, these teams like shorter, harder slider shapes. I imagine to help off fastball line, maybe from the strike throwing ability. Whereas you have other teams like the Yankees, Giants, and Mariners preferring that larger sweep, just chasing the stuff, maybe not paying too much attention to the intangibles or anything. But I wouldn't say the Giants and Mariners are like elite player development pitching side teams. But the Yankees are up there. I mean, I just did a video value on them in their pitching lab in the majors. So they do a good job. So that's just more of a philosophical one, but I do like the variance over the average, which is good signifier, I think, on the pitching philosophy side of things, as opposed to pure just noise, per se. Slider usage, another good one. Another one that I like a lot from a philosophical side, as opposed to a pure just we're looking at too much noise, random variance. Red Sox, Braves, and Mets throw a ton. Again, emphasizing the Mets here. I've done this a few times, but I think they're on the right track in a lot of things they're doing. They pop in a lot of these boards, and they're still getting results and are in zone a reasonable amount. Red Sox, Braves, interesting. The Braves are an enigma, man. This is a team that I think the public generally believes is great at pitching development. Internally in orgs and talking to other people, I don't believe that's the case. They've blown out a lot of arms. I don't know how well they are integrated from a biomechanics standpoint. But listen, I sound like an idiot because you look at Schwellenbach and they haven't done anything to Chris Sale. Chris Sale's a very, I wouldn't say simple pitcher, he's an elite pitcher, but there's not much you're going to do to Chris Sale. You're not going to be like, Sale, let's throw a different slider or a cutter now. He's Chris Sale. They have great results too. I struggle with them because anytime I present that case, most people will just bring up, well, they lead baseball in FIP in the minors and like they throw a lot of sliders. They also throw the highest amount of splits. Perplexing org to me. Slider usage low. I didn't emphasize enough the Tigers. I did mention them slightly. Minimal slider usage, reasonable amount of four seam usage. They're in zone a ton. They actually have that. I'm jumping back. Sorry, but I got to emphasize the Tigers because I kind of forgot to do so. Where'd I have them? So four seam usage high, low slider usage. They have the highest zone rate for sliders as well, for four seam fastballs as well. And they're getting results. And I find their approach interesting overall. I think they've done a really good job of IDing good fastball shape. Like Will Vest is really good. Sawyer Gibson Long, SGL I call him. There's another one that pops, Screwball obviously. But a lot of these more peripheral guys, they've had a lot of success with, and they're not using sliders a lot. So I think that's an interesting, it's a little dodgery, Razian is what the Tigers are doing. They're just maybe doing it in a slightly different way and getting really good results. So props to them. I wanted to emphasize them because they're going to show up on my board that I'm going to throw at the end of this video, which you got to hang around for. In terms of who are the best orgs in baseball on the pitching side. So my notes here, Rays highest slider strike rate. That should be second highest zone rate because number one is the Tigers. So second highest zone rate on the Rays. Again, Astros, Orioles, Yanks, biggest raw sweep, which lines up for the most part with the slider velocity side of things. The Mariners, I teased a little. Their slider usage went from 31%, which was top 5 in the minors, down to 24%. It's the biggest year-over-year change in slider usage. Interesting to me. I wonder whether they're going towards a different philosophy. I don't know if it's a byproduct of the arms they've had at the majors succeed, who are generally not sink sweep. Logan Evans seems to be okay, but their guys that have popped have been Wu and Gilbert and Kirby, etc., who aren't really big sweep guys. So that is, to me, signaling something internally changing in that org from an approach standpoint. Maybe it's variance, but I'm going to lean towards it not being variance, raw variance. Mets and Blue Jays jump slider velo up 1.5 miles per hour. That's pretty interesting. The average org is up about 0.5, which I don't believe I saw in each of the last 2 years. So I ask here, bye-bye to sweepers. No, obviously not. Still a really effective pitch overall. But this is what happens. Stuff models are based off prior year information and data. So as you update stuff models, your stuff numbers are going to change. A pitch that was a plus pitch 2 years ago, 3 years ago versus that environment of hitters now might be slightly different, whether it's higher or lower. And I wonder whether teams, this is a very small trend, but I wonder whether you're seeing more teams push up slider velocity into the vein of what we've seen from the Rays, Dodgers, Mets. All those teams have been relatively successful. Up for debate on the Dodgers. I still think they're pretty good at pitching development. So that's an interesting nugget. The Blue Jays, too, blew out a ton of arms a couple years ago. They now have Johnny King, Trey Savage, who's a very weird pitcher. Some other guys, too, in the minors. That's another one, an overall theme that I probably should have mentioned earlier, too, is separating what's happening on the major league side in organizations from the minor league side. And I'm focusing on the minor league side here, tying some things back. But I wonder at the major league level whether the Blue Jays aren't as advanced as other teams. But in the minors, it's encouraging to me. I would apply this to teams like the Rangers as well, who do a really good job on the minor league side. I think they're a little behind on the major league side. The opposite probably for the Rays, where maybe the minor league side for the Rays is not as elite as just having Kyle Snyder there, who's one of the best pitching coaches in baseball. All right, sinker usage now. I'm going to jump to this. Cutter usage as well. Just, again, some different subtle philosophies, mainly because the deviations around the average are large. Sinker usage, I mentioned Mariners. Athletics, maybe a push. Mariners way up there too, right? That's a massive difference. Almost double the average. And then Cubs, Astros, Guardians on the bottom in terms of sinker usage. Guardians, Guardians really, really big on extension, four-seam fastballs. I'm not totally surprised there. I'm a bit surprised the Cubs are not a big sinker team because they have, from a four-seam standpoint, I did another video on this a while back, which did really well, that talked about their internal philosophy of preferring cut on their fastballs. And as you cut the ball, what generally happens is you could get into cut sinkers where you're cutting a sinker with a cue and you're able to create drop on it. So I don't know if that's just something they want to add later. It seems very obvious that a lot of those arms there can add sinkers to be better pitchers, and maybe they haven't. So undervalued element of the Cubs, perhaps. Interesting idea. Cutter usage for a lot of these teams is just an alternative to four-seam fastballs. So I'm not entirely sure. Like, this is maybe how the Red Sox are hanging out on that K-Walk leaderboard, is because they're in zone with cutters enough. The Orioles, I had someone troll me on one of these old videos where I said they do a good job on the pitching development side. I still think they do an okay job on the pitching development side. They just haven't done a great job from a results standpoint on some of these arms. And they've had such poor success at the major league level. I understand questioning a bit of what's going on there. The Brewers, on the cutter usage as well, they're going to be a team that I like. They're just good. Just good development work. They have a bunch of success. Logan Henderson. Mizorowski getting his command is huge. Low cutter usage, Nationals, Rockies, Athletics. Mixed bag there. I like the Athletics as an uptick team, using a lot of sinker. Nationals and Rockies, I think, are probably in the bottom rung of pitching development. So, is what it is on that sense. Final notes, average or cut slider usage 1.5 points, percentage points, and average org increased 1.8. That is an interesting trend, right? I was talking earlier about how perhaps velocity is starting to plateau a bit in terms of how it's jumping year over year. I mentioned that sliders are getting harder, pushing down on sweepers. And then the other thing here that I'm seeing is, although we have certain orgs cutting fastball usage, the majority of orgs cut slider usage and actually increased fastball usage overall. So maybe that's a larger trend to watch, one that I'm kind of interested to see how it pans out, and whether that's, everything is cyclical, right? So we're just going to get back to probably more sync and things like that. Or as I've said on prior videos, just pure raw pitch diversity. Guardians #1 extension I mentioned. Orioles #1 in release height. Always been a trend for them each of the last couple seasons. They prefer, I imagine, just big dudes with high release heights. Big carry on their fastballs. Hasn't really resulted in a ton of success. Those are my final notes. Which brings us to the Mount Rushmore. This is my janky Photoshop of the orgs that I think are the best. I asked a couple people in different orgs about this. Listen, I should create a criteria here. I really wanted to just walk through this data, hit on a bunch of teams, as many as I could, and go from there. But I needed to give you some payoff for this video, which is, I think these are the 9 best teams from a pitching development standpoint. That's what I'm going to go with. Mets, Yankees, Dodgers, Brewers, and Tigers are my top 5. And I'm not giving you an order here, so don't try to interpret anything off the drop shadows or layering, whatever. These are the 5. This is my tier A. My tier 1B, or just tier B, I think are the Rays, Rangers. Sneaky one. I don't know how many people are going to have that, but they've done a really good job over the last couple of years, and I'm going to fade what's happening at the major league level, mostly from Mike Maddox's standpoint, etc. Red Sox uptrend. Guardians, I just wonder whether the Guardians have not taken a step back. Just, they're still top 10. I don't know why I'm critiquing them. I think in the past they were #1 from how much they got ahead from orgs on like the drive line, velo development, biomechanics side, and I wonder whether they're a slight step back because of that. But again, we're really nitpicking. I think this is a good crop of 9. The 10th is one that I'm not going to show you because I know I'm going to get a bazillion comments that are like, where is so-and-so? And guess what? That's my 10, okay? They're a wild card team. I do eventually want to put together a comprehensive ranking alongside criteria here on what I'm thinking about, because it gets really messy on like the acquisition side relative to internal development. Is there an org that doesn't acquire well but develops their guys well? I think a lot of people would just say, like the 5 to 15th round pitchers, how many of those have you gotten WAR out of at the major league level? Maybe that's an element I should bring in here to give some objective proof. This is a little more of a subjective touch based on everything I see and people I talk to. Have at it in the comments. Let me know if I'm wrong. Thanks for watching. This was a fun one.